right on time. We said we were going to share this really important information with you at noon. So it is now noon. We're going to go ahead and get started. So today we're going to talk about what government shutdowns mean for federal grantees. Just so you guys, maybe it's the first time you've participated in any of our events. I'm Patrice Davis. I'm the CEO of GrantWorks, and we host a number of online events, typically webinars hosted through Zoom, and other events to really talk about federal grants, really expand what we understand about federal grants. Everything we do, of course, is rooted in making sure that organizations comply with federal grants, but we do try to open that discussion up a little bit to talk about how federal grants impact all of us as individuals and certainly communities. So this is going to be hosted by Kelly Fraser. I'll be turning it over to Kelly in a few minutes. Kelly, if you can move on to the next slide, please. All right, so a little bit about GrantWorks. So GrantWorks, we are your grant consulting partner. Our services help organizations strengthen their capacity to compete for grants, secure funding for program services and innovation, and integrate systems-based grant management processes into their operations. You'll notice that I say integrate systems-based grant management processes into their operations. And so that's just a brief overview of GrantWorks. I'll ask Kelly to please move on to the next slide. All right, so just a little bit more about the company, and then we'll dive right into introducing Kelly. So GrantWorks is staffed by both pre and post award specialists. So for those of you who had never thought about grants in that way, grants have, a life cycle, and there's pre-award work and pre-award specialists and pre-award expertise. And those are typically your grant writers and, of course, prospect research professionals. Those are the pre-award specialists. And then, of course, on the post-award side, you have your grant managers, or they could be called grant administrators. And those are folks that specialize in making sure the organization is complying with the terms and conditions of that grant, whether it's a private sector grant or a grant from the public sector, such as the federal, state, or local government agency. So we're staff, and we have expertise on both sides. We develop and deliver federal grant management training. So we've done that. We've done custom training. We've delivered training in person and online. One of the training programs we developed for a federal agency is consistently rated 4.7 out of 5 stars by, it says 920. It's now actually 1,000 learners around the world. GrantWorks has been an SBA certified woman-owned small business since 2021. We, of course, are BBB certified. And one of the things we like to say is that we provide clarity and deliver aha moments to audiences via in-person and online speaking, training, and podcasts, including the Federal Grants Explained podcast. So please take a look at that. All right, next slide. All right, so I will turn it over now to Kelly so she can introduce herself. Actually, I'll do a brief introduction, and then, of course, Kelly can pick up from there. So Kelly Fraser is the lead grant consultant at GrantWorks, and she has quite a bit of experience supporting our clients, and she's done a fantastic job. We always get rave reviews about Kelly's service as the primary point of contact for a number of our clients, including economic development organizations, and quite a few of the other clients that she served. But yeah, I'll turn it over to Kelly so she can provide more details about her expertise.
Thanks so much, Patrice. Yes, so I am the lead grant consultant here at GrantWorks, and I'm also a certified grant management specialist from the National Grants Management Association. So that's a credential that, is used throughout the industry to signify that you have expertise in this area. I have closer to 8 years of experience in federal grant compliance and both pre and post award management. Prior to my consulting life, I worked in the global health and disaster relief sectors for a grant making agency, a grant recipient, pass-through entity, and a subawardee. So I have experience, as Patrice mentioned, from all aspects of the grant lifecycle and through all of those different perspectives. In my role at GrantWorks, I oversee $20 million or more in active federal grants, and I provide training and guidance on federal grant regulations and reporting as well. So today we'll be talking about government shutdowns in general. We'll look at some quick facts about government shutdowns and their implications. We'll talk about where we are today in 2026 with the most recent partial shutdown. We'll talk through the implications for federal grantees at both the pre and post award stages. So whether you're maybe applying for a federal grant or you've already received one and you're managing it. So what your organization needs to do to respond during a shutdown. But then we'll also look at how you can prepare for future shutdowns. So diving in with some quick facts. Unfortunately, government shutdowns are not that rare. We've had 23 full or partial shutdowns in the past 50 years. And those are the shutdowns that actually occur. In many cases, a shutdown is averted at the last minute when lawmakers reach a funding deal a day or two before funding runs out. So when those shutdowns do occur, they tend to be short. The average length of a shutdown is about 10 days. The longest one on record was in 2025 and lasted 43 days, but most of them are a little bit shorter than that. We are in a shutdown, a partial shutdown right now as well. That began on Saturday, February 14th, and it currently affects DHS funding only. This isn't the only shutdown that we've had in this fiscal year, so we'll talk about, what that looked like at other agencies in recent months. But it's really important to know that right now when we talk about shutdowns, we're really only referring to DHS today. I mentioned you can have a full shutdown or a partial shutdown, and this distinction is really critical. In a full government shutdown, that means that Congress has not passed a budget bill for the entire federal government, and all federal agencies are affected by that lapse in federal appropriations, meaning every single agency goes through a process to wind down their non-essential operations, furlough staff, and continue only essential activities. In a partial shutdown, Congress may have passed spending bills for some agencies and not others. So typically that budget bill is broken up into separate packages. And so if they've only passed some of those packages, the ones that have not received funding will be affected by a shutdown. And the other agencies that do have funding will continue to operate normally. So you'll see different effects at different agencies throughout the government during a partial shutdown. Shutdowns end when Congress passes either a full budget for the entire fiscal year, or sometimes they'll pass what's called a continuing resolution. That's a short-term funding measure that really is intended to give them additional time to negotiate the budget bill. Typically, that continuing resolution will keep funding flat for a short period of time, whether it's a couple weeks or a month or two. When a shutdown is ending, bills typically include retroactive pay for furloughed federal employees. So you'll see on the next slide, those federal employees that are not working during the shutdown are not paid during that period. In past shutdowns, they have almost always received a provision in the funding bill that allows them to get that retroactive pay, but that's not automatic. So those do need to be included in either the full budget or the CR. As I mentioned before, we're in our third shutdown of the fiscal year. So the federal fiscal year started on September 1st of 2025. And at that time, there was no budget passed for this fiscal year. So there was what we call a full shutdown, meaning every federal agency was affected. That doesn't mean every activity ceased, but every single agency had a lapse in appropriations. That shutdown lasted for 43 days and ended on November 12th with a continuing resolution, meaning it was that short-term funding bill that kept funding flat through January 30th. During that time, Congress passed 6 out of 12 appropriations bills and did not pass the other 6. So on January 31st, we had a second shutdown. But this one was partial and affected just those departments that you see here. So Defense, Homeland Security, HHS, Labor, Education, Transportation, HUD, State, and Treasury. those agencies had that shutdown until February 3rd. So this was fairly short. Funding lapsed on a Saturday, and by Tuesday they had passed the bill to fund those agencies. For most of those agencies, they are also now funded through the end of the fiscal year, so through September 31st or September 30th. But DHS is the exception. So the stopgap funding for DHS lapsed on February 14th, so over the weekend. And so they are currently the only ones subject to that partial shutdown. So what happens during a government shutdown? Each agency has what's called a contingency plan, and this is really what governs what each individual agency will do when they have a lapse in appropriations. This is submitted to the White House Office of Management and Budget every 2 years, and is updated before a shutdown occurs. So this plan outlines everything from how they will wind down operations to which staff will be furloughed versus which staff will continue to work. It'll outline which activities are considered essential or mandatory and what will be paused until a budget is passed. In general, non-essential staff are placed on furlough, meaning they do not work and they do not get paid until the shutdown ends. As I mentioned before, they usually receive retroactive pay at the end of the shutdown, but oftentimes they're not able to work during that period, so it can definitely cause financial hardship. That said, essential services and mandatory spending programs do continue. So even if most operations are shut down at an agency, the contingency plan will outline certain activities that do proceed. We have a picture of TSA here because that's one that tends to be pretty high profile during recent shutdowns. Their operations continue. They're considered law enforcement. Other examples of essential services include air traffic control, medical care, and emergency operations. So those employees will continue to work. Those activities will continue. The employees just won't receive pay until that shutdown is ended. We also have mandatory spending programs such as Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Those are not part of the annual appropriations. So those funding bills do not cover Social Security, Medicare, or Medicaid. The funding for those will continue regardless of what's happening elsewhere in the agency. And the staff that implement those programs tend to also continue working. Agencies begin preparing about a week before a potential lapse. So as I mentioned before, they'll update their contingency plans. They'll also start notifying employees of their furlough status 2 days before funding runs out. And so those employees will know ahead of time whether they'll be furloughed, and they'll tend to start winding down operations around that time. So for federal grantees, the implication there is that if a shutdown is impending, oftentimes your contact at the agency, even if it's a couple days beforehand, will be maybe focused on some of those wind down activities. So it's just something to keep in mind for future shutdowns. All right, we're going to look next at the implications for federal grantees, whether you're on the pre-award side or the post-award side, and how you need to respond in those situations. But first, I'm going to pass this over to Patrice to talk about the GrantsWorks evolution.
All right, good. Can you guys hear me? Can you hear me, Kelly?
Yes.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. So one of the reasons I wanted to just quickly interrupt a little bit is to talk a little bit about GrantsWorks evolution. So since 2024, we've been, in the middle of making some transitions. And so those transitions are underway. And in about 1 to 2 weeks, we'll be going live to share some of those transitions with you. We will be done. Kelly, if you can move to the next slide, please. One of the ways that we are changing is that we're modifying some of our services to serve, organizations based on their current needs and in different ways. And one of them is, of course, the Global Grant Collective membership. So if you can move to the next slide for me, Kelly. And basically, this is a member-based community of grant professionals, whether they're grant professionals at a state agency, at a foundation, a nonprofit, wherever you are, wherever you may be. It's also for sponsored research administrators that work in higher ed, or for fundraising or development staff. So basically, we created a community because so much is happening, and we wanted to have a space that would really help us understand what's happening on a broader scale, not just, of course, talking about what's happening from a regulatory point of view, but a broader, community or even country-based view. So we created it because we watched the whole federal agency disappear, right? We learned how to edit ourselves, our proposal narratives, and even our funded scopes to adjust to the changes that are happening with federal grants. We, of course, want to be able to solve a piece of the growing complex puzzle with our neighbor, with our colleagues. And we, of course, over time have learned to extend a helping hand as unfunded projects led to growing unemployment. So as grant professionals, we've seen so many things happening as a result of some of the changes that are happening with federal grants. And we all thought that a community would be a really great place to be able to address and understand, again, on a broader scale, what's happening. So the next slide, please. So really quickly, so a community is, we created it because we wanted to host a community of grant professionals around the world. And we see the community as a container for grant professionals who want to deepen their knowledge of how to obtain, manage, and maximize grant funding. The ones that believe that grant management is a way for them to increase their experience or their expertise. They want to increase their earning potential. They want to understand that there is less competition for grant managers. So this is really a great space for grant writers who want to become grant managers and be a part of the continuum of the grant life cycle. And if you want to learn about federal grants and federal grant management from specialists such as Kelly and from myself and others, and of course, maybe you want to expand your expertise again beyond the United States. Our first webinar for members only was about how grant professionals can, modify their expertise, or just really expand on what they know so that they can start managing and applying for grants from international organizations and even other countries. Next slide. So what is it? Again, it's a goal-centered, subscription-based learning community for grant and fundraising professionals around the world. Next slide, please. And it is, you set and achieve goals. You'll have access to exclusive member events. You'll expand your knowledge and your network, and of course, earn continuing education units, because some of our training programs in the membership are accredited. And we believe your voice should be heard. And so we do want to have member-only events, and we would like some of the members to host those events. So, for grants consultants, you'll be able to mastermind with other business owners so that you can level up your own businesses. Next slide. So I've already gone through who this is for. Next slide, please. But I do want to also focus on what it is not, right? So we are not trying to replace your existing memberships in, some of the other associations for grant professionals. We are not aiming to replace them. We see ourselves as an augment to that. We're going to be training focused. And so, that's one, training and community focused. And so we thought, we would again be a great addition to what you already have access to. Next slide. And then our training. I'm going to briefly go through some of our main training, not some of them, just our main one, the Federal Grant IQ training series. We offer this training in person, so we can come to your office, host a training for yourself, or your staff, and of course for your board members. Sometimes we've done that with board members in the room. It is a 3-module video-based training. It is accredited by 3 organizations that you guys are very familiar with. And, it was enhanced in 2024 by a former educator and curriculum designer. I'll ask you to please move on to the next slide, please. And it's based on a model we developed for the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and its grantees. And that's the training I mentioned earlier that is consistently rated 4.7 out of 5 stars. We still have that number at 932. It's actually now over 1,000. And we can provide training for up to 20 employees, subrecipients, and board members. We could, of course, expand that to up to 50 as needed. And we are actually in the works to be able to do that for an organization, but just want to make sure that you are aware of this training. Next slide. Quite a few details here, but we'll go through that later. But just know there are assessments that you have to take. There are module-specific activities. There's a practice quiz. There's key takeaways. And of course, there, once the training is done, you can, of course, get a certificate of completion, which you can then use along with some other information to get your certificate, your CEU's continuing education units from Grant Professional Certification Institute, and that's for those folks who are GPA members. CFRE, and of course for NASBA CEUs, National Association for the Standards, National Association State Boards of Accountancy. I apologize for saying that incorrectly. And then one more slide, and then we can turn it back over to Kelly. Included in the training are 3 downloadable tools, which are fantastic. Number one is the GrantWorks Federal Grant IQ Companion Guide. That's 80-something pages of activities that are aligned with the training so that you can reinforce what you're learning. The supporting documentation and cost allowability guidance for federal grants. That is an awesome resource for those of you who want to make sure that you are documenting federal grant expenses adequately. And then, of course, the ultimate government grant application checklist. Those are there. Once you register, you have immediate access to those resources. So I'll turn it back over to Kelly so she can tell you a little bit more about, you can keep going, Kelly, about, the impacts for pre-award, on the pre-award and post-award side.
Thanks so much, Patrice. Yes, so we will dive in next to what the implications are if you're a federal grantee and there is a shutdown, either a full government shutdown or a shutdown at an agency that you work with. So on the pre-award side, what's really important to know is that grant application portals such as grants.gov remain operational. So if there is a funding opportunity that's been released that you are planning to apply for, you should still be able to submit your application. Just keep in mind that the staffing around that may be reduced. So in a full shutdown, grants.gov support staff may be unavailable. During a full or a partial shutdown, your agency-specific contacts may be on furlough. So if you have technical questions about the application or if you run into glitches with the portal, they may not be available to answer questions or provide that assistance. So this just makes it even more important if you are considering applying for a grant to make sure you log into the system early, you review the NOFO carefully, and you give yourself time to resolve those technical issues. Especially if the shutdown hasn't started yet, you'll want to get those questions in before you lose contact with the agency. During that period, no new funding opportunities will be released by any agency affected by a shutdown, with the exception if they have maybe a funding stream that has been appropriated. So you can expect right now, DHS will not be releasing new funding opportunities. During the 43-day shutdown earlier this fiscal year, we saw pretty much nothing being posted on grants.gov. So keep in mind that even if something is forecasted during that period, you won't actually see it released until agency staff are back. This also means that applications that you've submitted will be paused. So those panels aren't going to convene. Contracting and grant officers aren't going to make those award decisions or issue notices of award during that period. And keep in mind too that there's a chance that deadlines could be extended once activities resume, but that's not guaranteed. So if your application deadline is projected to occur during the shutdown, you should be writing your grant with the expectation that that deadline will not move. If the agency decides to extend a deadline, that's really just not a guarantee. On the post-award side, so if you've already received a grant and you have a full shutdown or your agency undergoes a shutdown, most grantees will be able to carry on program activities based on funds already awarded. So that means that you probably won't get a follow-on funding, you won't get extensions of your award. But if you've already received that obligated funding, you should be able to continue program activities. The exceptions are going to be grants where you need to access federal facilities or personnel, or if you receive a stop work order from your agency. So if either of those two apply for your grant, you will need to stop work. If you aren't able to access federal facilities or personnel, keep in mind that you'll need to work with the agency once activities resume to assess the implications. So you should be documenting things. If this does apply to you, make sure that you're documenting what you're not able to do and when. Document any emails that you send during that time, any communications that you do have with federal officials, so that if you need to apply for a no-cost extension or revise your project plan later on in the grant, you've already created that case during the shutdown. Keep in mind too that grants and program officers will most likely be furloughed. They will not be available to meet, answer questions, or process requests like budget revisions, prior approvals, or carryovers. So if you're expecting that a shutdown could occur, make sure that you get those requests in early. Your grant and program officer will be very busy in the last couple of days before the government shuts down. So you don't want to wait to the last minute to submit a request like that. And keep in mind that you shouldn't assume that you'll have approval just because they're not available to respond. So this is really going to affect your program management and financial flexibility during the shutdown period. Reporting deadlines, though, do remain in effect. So if you have a program or a financial report that is due during a shutdown period, you're still expected to submit those reports on time. If you're not able to access a reporting portal, email it to your program officer or your grants officer and save a copy of that email. Even if you're able to upload something, make sure that you download a copy of that report. You're documenting when things were submitted, because if there's turnover once they come back online, or if something gets lost on the federal agency's end, you want to make sure that you have all the documentation as the grantee to show that you continue to meet your compliance obligations regardless of the shutdown. When it comes to drawing down funds, funding portals such as ASAP, which DHS uses, or PMS, or whatever other portals your specific agency may use, those tend to remain operational. So you can continue to submit requests for drawdowns. However, on the federal side, your officials are not going to be available to process and approve those requests. So keep in mind that this could affect your funding flows. Also keep in mind that some systems close temporarily at the end of the month or the fiscal year for reconciliation. So when this shutdown occurs, as the one did in 2025 at the end of the fiscal year, those systems were shut down for a couple days regardless. And so that means that grantees really needed to plan ahead for the ability to draw down funds. So if this affects you for a future shutdown, make sure that you're caught up to date with your drawdown requests so that you're not limiting your ability to draw down funds. And definitely keep in mind, the most important thing to remember during a shutdown is that compliance requirements are in effect regardless of whether someone is available at the federal agency to work with you. So organizations must maintain proper accounting, financial controls, and documentation of cost allowability throughout the shutdown. Those implications are really, really critical for grantees, and the shutdown does not impact compliance requirements whatsoever. So obviously we are already in the midst of the DHS third shutdown, and all of the other agencies, as I mentioned before, are funded through the end of fiscal year 2026. So that's great news for federal grantees. It means that if you have a grant from any of those other agencies, you should not be affected by a government shutdown for the rest of this fiscal year. But it's also important for grantees to be prepared ahead of time if things change. So if we get to the end of this fiscal year and there's no budget bill for fiscal year 2027, this is what you and your organization need to do to prepare for future shutdowns, to make sure that your operations are protected. So have a contingency plan in place. Just like every federal agency has its own contingency plan, you'll want to have one at your organization. Make sure you identify ahead of time how a shutdown may affect your program activities, staffing, and cash flow. You'll also want to review your federal award budget and your spending against that budget. Assess what funds you already have available and ensure that you understand how long your organization can continue to operate your grant-funded program with the current resources. Have a plan in place for how you're going to comply with your federal requirements. Make sure that your organization is prepared to continue to meet all reporting deadlines, maintain documentation, and follow award terms and conditions even if you cannot reach your program officer. As I mentioned before, document everything. Save receipts, confirmation notices, and records of all report submissions. This will help your organization demonstrate compliance if questions arise later. And if you're finding that you're having trouble putting this plan together or you need additional support to prepare, consider bringing on an external advisor. A grant compliance expert can help you strengthen contingency planning and navigate challenges that arise when federal staff are unavailable. So as I mentioned before, shutdowns can be very stressful for federal grantees, but they don't have to stop your work. By preparing ahead, staying compliant, and monitoring official updates, you can keep your programs moving forward regardless of a federal shutdown. If you need support in building a contingency plan for your organization, please feel free to schedule a free consultation, and we can talk you through your options and make sure that your grants stay on track even during uncertain times. All right, and I'm going to turn this back over to Patrice.
Thank you so much, Kelly. I really appreciate it. So one of the things I did want to kind of pick up on is where she said, if you're experiencing any challenges and you want to make sure you're navigating a shutdown or even your federal grants in general, and you want to do it in a way where you are confident that the work is being done correctly, that the federal grant or your grant portfolio is being managed effectively, it is really, really important that you contact and partner with a federal grant compliance firm such as GrantWorks. It's because, these are professionals. We are professionals who have been managing grants in our previous lives, in our previous careers. I've managed grants for universities and a variety of organizations. Kelly's also managed grants, so we know what to do intuitively. We're not, coming up with, probably guessing or anything. We are actually, we know exactly what to do. We also know how to interpret the regulatory requirements and other details in your notice of award to ensure that you comply, whether it is a shutdown or not. On the screen are some ways that you can connect with us, and I'm also going to drop in the chat, an easy link for you to schedule some time to talk with us and learn a little bit about how we can support you. And of course, you can come prepared to tell us about your federal grants or your federal grant portfolio. We can support you no matter what your starting point is, whether you want to make sure you have everything ready as you are preparing for a single audit, whether you have a new notice of award and you have subrecipients and you really want to make sure that you do that correctly, or maybe you need federal grant management policies and procedures, or you just need a firm that's going to manage your grant for the organization so that you can focus on your programs, your projects, any innovation or any research that the grant funded. But I do want to, of course, thank Kelly again for taking the time to prepare this deck. This is actually a resource that we've shared with our community. And that's another way you can, stay in touch with us, is to subscribe to our newsletter and just become a part of our community, whether it is the formal community, which is the Global Grant Collective, or subscribe to get our newsletters and really, really good information that we send out to the community, which we've been doing for 3 years, guys. So we've really been committed to this work for a long time. GrantsWorks itself has been in operation for 6 years. Kelly's been with us for almost 2.5 years. So I'll pause to see if there are any questions. I'm not sure who's all out there. This is our first time, or maybe the second time going live. And we did this sort of on a whim, knowing that the shutdown would more than likely happen. We weren't sure what was going to happen by the time we came back to the office. Shutdown is still underway, so we figured we would just kind of jump on LinkedIn and share this great resource with you guys. So I'm going to see if there's anyone out there. Don't see anyone yet, but if there is anyone out there and you have any questions, maybe you're watching this after, maybe you're watching this later, reach out to Kelly or to me on LinkedIn. You can easily find us on LinkedIn. And then we can, again, see what we can do to support your organization. If it's an easy question, we can simply just answer it through the LinkedIn chat. So I'll turn it over to Kelly for any final words. And I just, again, want to thank anyone who's here watching us now or watching us in the future. I'll turn it back over to you, Kelly, to close us out.
Thanks so much, Patrice, especially for inviting me to host this event. Really grateful that we got to share this information with our community. And as Patrice said, if you would like to talk through any challenges that your organization is experiencing, or how to navigate the implications of a shutdown for your particular organization, please don't hesitate to reach out. I hope this information was useful for everyone. And thank you so much for joining.
Awesome. Thank you, Kelly. We're ending now. Bye, y'all.